The House will come to order. Prayer by the chaplain.
A hymn of trust and guidance based on Psalm 23, written by Marty Haugen. God is my shepherd, so nothing shall I want. I rest in the meadows of faithfulness and love. I walk by the quiet waters of peace. Gently you raise me and heal my weary soul. You lead me by pathways of righteousness and truth. My spirit shall sing the music of your name. Though I should wander the valley of death, I fear no evil, for you are at my side. Your rod and your staff, my comfort and my hope. You have set me a banquet of love in the face of hatred, crowning me with love beyond my power to hold. Surely your goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of God forever. Shepherd me, O God, beyond my wants, beyond my fears, from death into life. Amen.
The chaplain for today is Reverend Dr. Jules Erickson from All Saints Lutheran Church, Cottage Grove, Minnesota. Pledge of Allegiance. Please remain standing and recite the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America. The clerk will take the roll. The clerk will close the roll. Quorum is present. The clerk will read the journal of the preceding day.
Journal of the House, 89th session, 75th day, St. Paul, Minnesota, Wednesday, March 30th, 2016.
If there's no objection, further reading of the journal will be dispensed with, and the journal will be approved as corrected by the chief clerk. Hearing no objection, the journal is approved as corrected by the chief clerk. Reports of standing committees and divisions. A copy of this order of business has been placed on each member's desk. If there's no objection, the reports will be adopted. The member from Hennepin, Representative Thiessen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would like to set us.
Write these down.
Oh, no, miss, that's okay. Thank you.
Any objection to the reports? Hearing no objection, the reports are adopted. Second reading of House files.
Second reading House File number 2497.
Second reading.
Second reading House File 2683.
Second reading.
Second reading House File 2774.
Second reading.
Second reading House File 2798.
Second reading.
Second reading House File 2991.
Second reading.
Second reading House File 2992.
Second reading.
Second reading House File 3090.
Second reading.
Second reading House File 3117.
Second reading.
Second reading House File 3204.
Second reading.
Second reading House File 3208.
Second reading.
Second reading House File 3309.
Second reading.
Second reading House File 3333.
Second reading.
Second reading House File 3469.
Second reading.
Second reading House File 3546.
Second reading.
Second reading House File 3586.
Second reading.
Second reading House File 3699.
Second reading. Introduction of bills. The following House files have been offered for introduction today. The chief clerk will report the House files and give them their first reading.
Introduction and first reading of House Files 3726 through 3773.
First reading, House files 3726 through 3733. Messages from the Senate.
Message from the Senate, Mr. Speaker. I hereby announce the passage by the Senate of the following Senate file herewith transmitted. Senate file number 2850, an act relating to state government. The message is signed Joanne Emshoff, Secretary of the Senate.
The member from Pope County, Representative Anderson. For what purpose do you rise?
Point of personal privilege, Mr. Speaker.
State your point of personal privilege.
Mr. Speaker, members, you may have noticed all the green jackets around the Capitol complex today, and that's because today is official FFA Day here at the Minnesota Capitol.
Blue jackets.
What did I say?
Green.
Oh, I'm sorry. The blue jackets. Blue jackets. I hope that wasn't on TV, but anyway, we have with us today the state officers in blue jackets here with the Minnesota FFA. The officers. I'd like to introduce their names for you if I don't mess that up as well. President is P.J. Arsvold of Plainsview, Elgin, Millville. The Vice President, Morgan Krause of Buffalo. Secretary Mariah Daninger of Forest Lake. The Treasurer is Travis Trendle of Lanesboro. The Reporter is Madison Taylor of Randolph. And the Sentinel, Sam Johnson from Glenville. Those are your state Minnesota FFA officers. How about a round of applause?
First reading of Senate files.
First reading of Senate file number 2850, an act relating to state government. The bill is being referred to the Committee on Government Operations and Elections Policy.
Report from the Committee on Rules and Legislative Administration.
Pepin from the Committee on Rules and Legislative Administration, pursuant to Rules 1.21 and 3.33, designates the following bills to be placed on the calendar for the day for Monday, April 4th, 2016, and establishes a pre-filing requirement for amendments offered to the following bills: House File numbers 1089, 2956, 3101, and 2613.
Motions and resolutions. There are copies of the non-controversial motions at the House desk and online. If there's no objection, we'll take action on these motions first. Seeing no objection, the motions prevail.
Hamilton moves that House File number 871 be recalled from the Committee on Health and Human Services Reform and be re-referred to the Committee on Health and Human Services Finance.
I recognize the member from Cottonwood, Representative Hamilton, to your motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That's my motion, my bill. This has to do with the Dorothy Day Center. I spoke to both of the chairs, and they're okay with this, and I'd ask for your support.
Any discussion on the Hamilton motion? Seeing no discussion, all those in favor of the Hamilton motion signify by saying aye. Those opposed, no. The motion prevails.
Wills move that House File number 2825 be recalled from the Committee on Greater Minnesota Economic and Workforce Development Policy and be re-referred to the Committee on State Government Finance.
I recognize the member from Dakota, Representative Wills, to your motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, that is my motion, and the chair of Greater Minnesota Committee does not need to hear the bill, but State Government Finance does because there's a study in the bill that is under the purview of that committee.
Any discussion on the Wills motion? Seeing no discussion, all those in favor of the Wills motion signify by saying aye. Those opposed, no. The motion prevails.
Franson moves that House File number 3436 be recalled from the Committee on Health and Human Services Reform and be re-referred to the Committee on Health and Human Services Finance. Franson.
The member from Douglas, Representative Franson, to your motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Members, simply doing exactly what the motion calls for. The bill was heard as part of a larger piece of legislation, House File 3433, that was heard and passed in HHA Health and Human Service Reform. Just moved on into finance on Tuesday. We want to ensure that 3436 stays in line with the Senate's first deadline.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Mullery.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I agree with Representative Franson. It doesn't need to be heard in Health and Human Services Reform.
Any further discussion on the Franson motion? Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of the Franson motion signify by saying aye. Those opposed, no. The motion prevails.
Pursuant to House Rule 4.30, Lunan moves that House File number 3246 be recalled from the Committee on Civil Law and Data Practices, be given its second reading, be placed on the General Register.
Yep. He's not here. Where's Lunan? I recognize the member from Scott, Representative Lunan, to your motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that House File 3246 move from civil law over to data practices. I've talked to the chairman about it, and we have concurrence on it. I'm sorry, from civil law down to the general register. My apologies.
Thank you for the clarification. Any discussion on the Lunan motion? The member from Ramsey, Representative Lesh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I support the motion.
Any further discussion on the Lunan motion? The member from Dakota, Representative Atkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and good afternoon. My apologies, members. I didn't expect to speak today, so I'm wearing my Minnesota Wild shirt rather than my coat and tie. Will the maker of the motion please yield for a question or two?
He will yield. Representative Atkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative Lunan. Is this the bill that undoes a Minnesota Supreme Court decision that protects the primary homemaker benefit in Minnesota no-fault law?
Mr. Speaker, this is the bill that deals with people collecting twice on an auto accident. That's your question?
Representative Atkins.
Mr. Speaker, I'll yield for questions too, but Representative Lunan, if you will, Section 1 of your bill undoes the primary homemaker benefit under Minnesota law. Is that correct?
He will yield. Representative Lunan.
Well, if you're asking to debate the bill right now, I mean, I'm prepared to do that. The second part of the bill deals with people or insurance companies being compelled to pay for that part of the loss that was actually incurred by the plaintiff.
Representative Atkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If Representative Lunan will yield for one more question. I was incorrect in my initial comment. You noted the second part. This actually undoes 2 Minnesota Supreme Court decisions. Isn't that right?
He will yield. Representative Lunan.
You're correct, Representative Atkins, in that this bill is in response to a recent court ruling that did an interpretation, and in that interpretation invited the legislature to do a correction to the term of the definition of the word loss under the no-fault statute. So you are correct.
Representative Atkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative Lunan. I think you just made the case for going to civil law. Will you yield for one more question?
He will yield. Representative Atkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative Lunan. You said I'm correct in that it undoes 2 Minnesota Supreme Court decisions. Are both of those case decisions civil law decisions?
Representative Lunan.
He couldn't
Representative
hear me.
Atkins.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Lunan, are both the Leonardson and the Rindell decisions civil law decisions?
My reason for this motion of moving from civil law over to the general register is because historically no fault is settled in an arbitration case. Now, I'm not going to speak in exactness here. There have been exceptions to that, but typically, historically, no-fault laws have not gone to civil law.
Representative Atkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Lunan, what the heck? One more question, if you will.
He will yield. Representative Atkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative Lunan. You mentioned it impacts arbitrations. In fact, we had testimony in committee that it will impact 35,000 no-fault claims per year. That's 35,000 civil law claims per year that now will be more likely to go to trial rather than to arbitration, which should have a big impact on the civil courts. You know what? I don't need further, you're right, we don't need to debate this. It obviously ought to go to the Civil Law Committee. There was a motion, it was unanimous that it go to Civil Law. The chair of the Commerce Committee, the chair of the Civil Law Committee, who was at the hearing, both voted for it. You just made the case for why it ought to go to the Civil Law Committee, and I think it would benefit from some debate there. What it does is it undoes Minnesota's primary homemaker benefit. Benefits 97% of the folks who benefit from this are women. It is a terrible position to take, and it certainly merits more decision in the Civil Law Committee. That's probably where it should have gone in the first place. So members, please vote against this motion. It should go to Civil Law, and I hope that's where it ends. Thank you. And Mr. Speaker, if I might, I'd appreciate a roll call, please.
Roll call has been requested. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. The member from Scott, Representative Lunan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Atkins, Representative Atkins, I saw you at the hearing, so I know you heard the invite I gave you to go ahead and research what losses that this refers to. The bulk of them deal with households with one single person in them. The contention that it has a high incidence of females or things like that is absolutely not true. It does not affect, has absolutely no effect on someone's right to go ahead and litigate in civil law. This has to do with accessing no-fault benefits.
Any further discussion on the Lunan motion? Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the motion. The clerk will close the roll. Bernardi votes no. There being 70 ayes and 53 nays, the motion prevails. The clerk will give the bill its second reading.
House File Number 3246, second reading.
Second reading. Announcements. The member from Mille Lacs, Representative Erickson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Education Innovation Policy Committee will resume in 20 minutes after adjournment in room 200. Education Innovation, we've been moved to room 200 when we reconvene 20 minutes after adjournment. Please be on time so we can have dinner away from here.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Thiessen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the majority leader yield?
She will yield. Representative Thiessen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We were just wondering on our side if you have any idea what the schedule will be next week with regard to floor sessions. There were some people that were surprised that we were having a Friday floor session this week, and if we could have advance notice of that, that would help.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Pepin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative Thiessen. Right now it's looking like Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday, and possibly Friday, probably pretty similar to the schedule this week.
The member from Hennepin, Representative
Thank
Thiessen.
you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you for that. Would Representative Knobloch yield for a question?
He will yield. Representative Thiessen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We're about 6 weeks from the end of session. There's rumors going around the building that committee targets have been given to chairs for their committees, and so I was asking when we will find out what whether they have been issued yet or not, when we will find out what those committee targets are, so that folks can start thinking about what the scope of this session might be over the last 6 weeks.
The member from Sherburne, Representative Knobloch.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Thiessen, no targets have been issued to committee chairs. I would expect that we will set targets in the Ways and Means Committee. I would expect that we'll be moving forward with that sometime in the near future, but I don't have a particular date yet.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Thiessen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If Representative Knobloch would yield for one more question.
He will yield. Representative Thiessen.
So, and maybe targets haven't been set, but can you just let us know if committee chairs at this point know what budget target what budget number they should be working toward, even if it's informally?
The member from Sherburne, Representative Knobloch.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Thiessen, no, we have not given informal targets to committee chairs either, and I don't think we've given indications to the committee chairs in the sense that you're saying of a particular target.
Announcements. The member from Hennepin, Representative Pepin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I move that when the House adjourns today, it adjourns until 9 a.m. Friday, April 1st, 2016.
Representative Pepin moves that when the House adjourns today, it adjourns until 9 o'clock a.m. on Friday, April 1st, 2016. All those in favor of that motion signify by saying aye. Those opposed, no. The motion prevails. Representative Pepin.
I move that the House do now adjourn.
Representative Pepin moves that the House do now adjourn. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The motion prevails. The House stands adjourned until 9 o'clock a.m., Friday, April 1st, 2016.